Welcome to another episode of the Sturgeon Bay Community Church podcast. My name is Shane Saxon. This is Joe Posleski. We're pastors at Sturgeon Bay Community Church. And today our topic is a sermon for the aged, for the elderly, for the old folks. Joe, you're doing a little mini-series on the topic of intergenerational ministry, which is a key value at our church. And so last Sunday was for the aged. Mm-hmm. Next Sunday is for the children.
That's right.
For the young. What caused you to land on this mini-series? Why is intergenerational worship such a high value and priority for us at Sturgeon Bay Community Church?
Yeah, Shane, we've identified this metaphor. We could call the church a lot of things. It's a hospital. It's a place of worship. In our case, we like to use this metaphor of family. So I think that intergenerational family, one of our values, is so important because we've just been uniquely gifted by God to have all of these different age groups come together every Sunday. So we've got young children, we've got old people, and every age and stage in between. And I think we wanted to name that out loud to identify not only that unique characteristic of our church in Door County here, but it was just to name it and say, like, this is important. And there's value and esteem for each of these ages and stages that we want to not only identify but celebrate. So that's kind of like, let's delve into that for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, what do you think are some of the marks of a church that do embrace this intergenerational flair of worship, this value? What do you think sets it apart from maybe a church that's less intentional or maybe doesn't think about the value of different ages and stages?
This is great because I think a lot of churches at least give lip service to the idea that, like, yeah, we're for all ages. And so the way they mark that out typically is like, we've got different offerings for each group. And so that's one way to answer that question. I think what we do differently, uniquely, is that when we gather on Sundays, we are actually trying to, in some intentional ways, put all of the ages together. So you'll notice if you come to our 8:30 service, all of our kids spend the first 20 minutes with us worshiping. We celebrate our children by putting them up in front of the congregation and blessing them before they go downstairs to worship afterwards. So small ways, but really intentional ways that we're trying to say, we want all of us together.
Yeah. It's key that we use that word intergenerational.
That's right.
Because that inter part means there's an integration of these different ages. We want young and old to be together in a meaningful way.
That's right.
And one thing our society kind of does, maybe unintentionally, is it brackets us away from each other. Job opportunities, educationally, the kinds of things that you have access to, all of them have some ways that we get sorted based on our ages in some ways.
And the churches kind of follow suit in some ways, right? So you come in and the wife, for instance, goes to her women's ministry, and the man goes to his men's ministry, and the kid goes to his youth ministry. And all of a sudden, unintentionally, we've kind of disintegrated the family to ages and stages. Right. And so, the church, I think, has even fallen into that mindset in some ways as well.
So you turned our attention to the Old Testament primarily to try to bring out this value of intergenerational ministry, but specifically by trying to highlight the value of being elderly, of aging, and how that concept is talked about in the Old Testament, and that it is something we need to ponder so that we come to age and experience thoughtfully, and that people who are in that stage are navigating it thoughtfully, and those who are young are embracing all the benefits and the value and the commands on our lives that we respect the elderly. So you first kind of turned to Leviticus. So talk to me about how you landed on this passage and what this verse means for this value.
Well, there's certain, at least in the English Standard Version, which we use, the translation, I was remembering a lot of verses about gray hair. And so, as I was kind of doing a survey here of the Old Testament, landed here in Leviticus, that you shall stand up before the gray head and honor the face of an old man. And so I thought to myself, well, there probably is the clearest kind of Old Testament command. Like there is esteem and value that we need to give to this age group. So I thought, well, this is a great place to start.
Yeah.
Like, and in the context of Leviticus 19, how should we be holy before God?
Yeah.
This is one of the ways that we're holy before God.
Yeah, and I mentioned this to several people, that you showed great restraint not taking a pot shot at me and the fact that I have gray hair and have since I was 10 years old. So I just want to say thank you publicly.
And I love that you can play both sides of the fence.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So here's a question, if I could ask you to put your biblical theological hat on for a second.
Okay.
You know, Leviticus also tells us to not eat bacon. And here it says that we should revere our elders. So why does this apply to us? Like, why should I do this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that we see, plenty of whether it's a command or not, I think we see plenty of times in Scripture, Old and New Testament, where there's a sense of honor given to the aged. So, you don't see Jesus going around the rabbis, for example, or the Pharisees. And of course, that doesn't necessarily mean old, young, but there seems to be some kind of structure and order, even in just kind of contemporaneous life, both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. I'm trying to think of, even when we did the public reading of Caleb, saying at 85, I'm as fit and vigorous to do the work for the Lord as always. So there's like some implications there that, like, being elderly, there's value in that season of life, and we need to kind of at least respect that.
Yeah, so. And I love how here in verse 32, the verse says, honor your elders, and then it says, "For I am the Lord; I'm your covenant God," and so it grounds it in the order of creation, that God is who He is. So theologically, and when we get to the New Testament and we see Jesus kind of helping us to see deeper into what the law is intended for, I think we can look back on a law like this and see this reflects how God created the world to be. With something like the food laws, this is something that did demonstrate that God is pure and holy, but these particular food items are not necessarily contextually the best way for us to demonstrate that. We should just be morally pure. But a command like this, it accords with Paul's thinking in Ephesians 6, honor your father and mother and you will inherit the land. This is grounded in who God is Himself. And the law does that. It points us to who God is.
Yes, right. There's kind of inherent in the nature and essence of God are these kind of structures and orders and values, and we should see that again in youth this coming week. Yeah. So
then you used a couple of examples to kind of demonstrate from the Old Testament ways that we should think about the elderly. And so you've already mentioned Caleb, but kind of remind us, why does Caleb come to mind when you think about honoring the elderly?
Yeah, it's kind of that one story that comes to the top of mind. Of an older person that identifies specifically, like, I'm identifying as an old man now. I've gone through my youthful days. I've gone through that prime of life. And you know what I found? I found that age is not a restrictor of my worship. And I'm ready to do for God what I was ready to do for Him then. And I thought to myself, like, that's it. That's kind of the kernel, like, way that we want to be when we're older. And I think that sometimes gets lost, and even in Christian culture here in our country, in the West as well, that sometimes we just kind of contra that idea of Caleb, like, we're going to coast to the finish. Our hard work was done then. Now we're coasting here for the last quarter pole of the life.
Yeah. It seems like you kind of, we have our churches filled with people like this who have decided that their last trimester, you might say, of life is one where they're going to use it to glorify God the best they can. And the culture doesn't incentivize us to do that. It kind of incentivizes us to not do that, to stack our riches and then go count our money piles for a while. Yet those who give themselves to God in this last season have so much to give.
I mean, they have the benefit of life experience. They have the benefit of hopefully acquiring wisdom from the Lord, and they're probably in most cases more available now than they've ever been. So I think there's just great. They have so much now to offer, and I wanted to bring that message across to them.
Yeah, for sure. You also talked about the example of Rehoboam as perhaps a counterexample to thinking about Leviticus 19. What did you think the story of Rehoboam brought to your understanding of this verse?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we learn best by saying, don't do it this way. So I think there were two great, like, negative examples in Scripture for both of the points of the sermon. First one, Rehoboam, a young man who literally has the opportunity to take the road of age and wisdom and temperance, or take the road of youth and vitality and maybe foolishness in this case. And he listens to both sides, and he knowingly makes the choice to kind of eschew the old guys' counsel and say, yes, let's go with the young guys. And the repercussions are terrible. Yeah. And so I think it was almost like the perfect negative example.
Yeah, it seems like especially it psychologically resonates in that a lot of times the reason young people reject the older people's advice is this hubris. Like, we've got it figured out. We have strength and vitality. You don't. And so let us do it our way. And it kind of puts its finger on the way that young people can tend to think they're more in control of their lives than they actually are, when the elderly people are saying, look, we understand why you think this, but don't do that.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a certain level of which each one of us feel in some sense like invincible. Like, the world can't touch us. The repercussions won't be that bad. When the wise, the older people, have like, don't do what I did. I know why you're thinking that way, but don't think that way. And we would do well to at least pause. And I say we because I think, our culture, particularly right now, like we're aging. It takes longer for us to age. So I'm 50 and under is kind of youth still in this sense, I think. So,
yeah. I think a common way I see this is that I've just known some older, wiser guys in my life who have really prioritized spending time with God, organizing their lives such that they are spending their time communing with Jesus, spending that quiet time each day, giving themselves to mission.
Yep.
And I can feel the impulse in myself. I can see other younger guys thinking, well, now is the time to build my empire. Now is the time to make the money in my career. I will get to that later. And these guys have said, use this time wisely if you want to really take joy in life.
Yeah. I mean, I've looked at the other side of the rainbow. There is no pot of gold there. Whatever you're chasing is a fool's errand. Live a life of temperance, simplicity before God. Those are the things that you can begin to unearth as you realize, like, the ambitions of youth are fleeting.
Yeah. Now, you also used Hezekiah as an example. Remind us of that example.
Right. So the second point of the sermon is that, like, not only should we respect and honor the aged, but to be aged, to be elderly, is a blessing. And so to embrace that mindset that this season isn't wasted time, that I'm just like marking time till my death. And so Hezekiah is an example of a guy who did it so well in his youth. It wasn't that he was a foolish youth. He did really great work and really made really great reforms for Israel. And yet there comes a time in his life where he gets sick, where he asks God for more life. God graciously grants him that. And in those last 15 years is when he begins to make all his mistakes. So it's kind of a negative example of, like, don't waste this.
Yeah.
This is a blessing that you've been given from God. Don't waste this season of life. There's much to be done. And if the idea is, and I think maybe even more specifically, if the idea is now I'm just going to show everybody my riches and kind of brag and boast on what God's been giving me, then God says that's a foolish way to spend that time. I think that particularly resonates with maybe some people even up here in Door County.
For sure. Yeah, I think the beauty of the Hezekiah example is that the life itself is a gift. He's going to die, and in the same way, old age itself is a gift. It's just we don't always think about the fact that God could take our lives at any time. So for a person to be elderly is to have been given that gift. How are they going to use it?
Exactly. And I think, showing everybody your toys is not the best way to spend that time.
Yeah. So as you were developing these 2 points from Leviticus and Proverbs, you did make some really specific and helpful charges to us as a congregation about how to think about responding to them, about things we can do to bless the aged and things we can do to be a blessing as the aged. Maybe start with the things that we can do to bless the elderly. What are some of your recommendations that we should take and try to act on?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's multiple ways this can work. Now, it can work in an immediate family with children just recognizing, like, my parents are much older than me. They have, and maybe to try to start breaking down even some of the assumptions we start telling ourselves as young people of, I know better than them. and just trying to help them say, honor them. Honor them because it's a commandment. Honor your father and mother so it'll go well with you. You have length of days. But honor them because they're older and they're deserving of that. And then just beyond immediate family, encouraging young people to get out of the box of like, I want to spend time with my own kind, which we're all prone to do, by the way. It doesn't matter if you're old or young. But maybe go spend time with some older folks. Take them out to lunch. Ask them to give you some wisdom in your life. There's just multiple different opportunities. And then, just easy ways. Take them out for coffee. Take them out for a hamburger or something like that. So, I mean, some easy ways. And then on the other side of that, as an elderly person, do the same thing. Go out of your way to not just spend time with your own age group. Go befriend a young person. Get to know them. Start developing those relationships. So maybe some easy, low-hanging fruit there. But
yeah, I think you brought up some really good specific examples, and I think that it can be really easy for young people to attempt to lean only into other young people as their friend group. And I think that age does not have to be a barrier to deep and rich friendship. It's really just about putting yourself in the path of someone who will reciprocate when you attempt to be a friend with them. And a big part of doing that is just being a part of a church, especially one that values intergenerational worship like ours does. If you come to church on a Sunday here, you are going to bump into people of a different age group because we're a pretty relatively diverse church in terms of age demographics. Yeah. And so being a part of a church can be a big game changer in this way. So the only older people you relate to aren't merely bosses and parents, right? But that they can be friends. And so there's that. Within the life of our church, there are small groups that are relatively older guys who would love to have younger guys come to them. Mm-hmm. There's many different things. What are some of the obstacles you think that get in the way of people actually living this out?
I think part of this, and this goes to a pretty deep discussion that I don't know we can totally get into, but having a real identity as a body of Christ, having a real corporate identity as a church family, to say it's not just about me, it's not just about my immediate family, but like I identify as a Sturgeon Bay Community Church family member. If we begin, and we have been trying to cultivate that idea, then it brings us to inhabit roles within a family of grandfather, grandmother, child to a father. So like my son is my son in my immediate family, but my son is also a young man who can be a grandson to some other grandparents in our church family. And thankfully, like that has actually begun to happen. Like we've had some grandparents, like surrogate grandparents in my church family that have taken on that role in my kids' lives. Not because they don't have any blood ties, but because they're united in Christ. And so I think inhabiting those roles, those familial roles within the church family, I think is a huge piece of beginning to go down that road.
So you also talked about the opposite direction, which is older people blessing the younger. What were some of your specific applications there? Yeah,
I mean, I think for older people to remember how difficult it is to raise family, for example, and say, could we offer to watch this family's children for a night so that this couple can go out and get some time alone, have a date, something like that. So that would be one example. Another one was what I just mentioned, take on the role of surrogate grandparent to some younger kids. Like maybe your grandparents are over in Minnesota or, way far away. Well, there's young kids here in our church family that could use some great influential older people in their lives. Yeah. And so, there's just a couple of examples of how they can be a blessing.
I think the difficulty of all this is that it's friendship, and friendship at its very root is something given, not earned. Mm-hmm. And so it's precarious. And the only way you can have a friendship is if you put yourself in another person's life and then they reciprocate, and you cannot control if they will.
Right.
And then something needs to happen between the two of you that compels you to continue being together. And so the result of that reality is it means that whether you're young, whether you're old, you have to take the actions to put yourself in someone else's life. And then when it doesn't go well, not to be like retreat and never try again. but to just continue to put yourself in those positions. And I think building that stamina for attempting to put ourselves in other people's lives with an open hand, not expecting anything in return, is really the key to developing these rich friendships.
I totally agree. It takes a lot of work, and you don't have like the inherent kind of, oh, well, we're blood relatives, so we have to be together. You know, but you have to make a choice, and these are unnatural choices to just spend with one another outside of those like normal ways.
Yeah. It was really a helpful sermon, really specific applications, and I'm looking forward to next week.
Yeah, great.